Sergeant Jake Lawson had seen some strange deliveries during his time stationed at Outpost Delta 17, but this one was a first. The crate sat in the middle of Dock Bay 3 like it belonged there. Smooth edges, reinforced polymer, temperature stabilized and sound dampened. A bright warning in diplomatic red was stamped across the side. Fragile. Handle with care. Bio-organic asset. Jake folded his arms. So they sent me a fridge? The diplomatic courier, a nervous, round man, stuffed into a uniform 2 sizes too small and at least 2 days too ripe, cleared his throat. It's not a fridge, Sergeant. It's your reward. My what? Your reward. Officially designated war compensation, asset class 4. Jake rubbed the bridge of his nose. Last time they sent me a reward, it was a coffee maker that screamed when you turned it on. This one's organic. Before Jake could ask what that meant, the crate hissed softly. Seals unlocked with a sound like a sigh, and cold, sterile air slipped out. Then she stepped forward. She was tall, not menacing, just sharp. Her skin shimmered under the bay lights like burnished silver, too smooth to be human, too warm to be metal. Her ears swept back from her temples like sculpted blades, twitching with subtle precision. Every move she made was a study in grace, poised, controlled, like a blade half-drawn. Definitely not human. Definitely from the Xaranth species. Jake had seen enough propaganda posters to recognize one. They always made them look monstrous, with claws and rows of fangs. But this one was unnervingly close to human. Human enough to stir something in his gut. Alien enough to make his fingers twitch toward the stunner on his hip. She scanned the room with flared nostrils before her gaze locked onto him. So you're the human. Jake blinked. Depends. You the new espresso machine? Unlikely. I make better conversation. The courier coughed again, fumbling with a data slate. Her leash is already synced to your ID, Sergeant. Full compliance. You're her handler now. Handler, Jake muttered, the word sticking in his throat. She's legally sanctioned. War compensation, asset class 4, and, best not to use the term slave in your reports. There are optics involved. The Xaranth woman raised one eyebrow. You humans really do have a gift. You make slavery sound like a spreadsheet. Jake tried not to smile. You're lucky. They could have sent you to Colonel Maddox. He collects bones. I would have set him on fire. Smarter than the toaster with abandonment issues then. The courier made a strangled noise and shuffled out of the bay like it owed him money. Jake turned to her. Got a name? Sarah. And you? Jake. She nodded once. Fine. Lead the way. They walked together through the outpost. Well, he walked. She glided. Outpost Delta 17 was a patchwork relic on a barely terraformed moon, the atmosphere dome barely holding together under the strain. Gravity generators only worked when they felt like it, which meant most of the furniture hovered in quiet protest. This is the control center, Jake said, pointing to a half-lit room where a holographic star map flickered between systems and an outdated animation of dancing birds looped on a screen. That's my bunk. Yours is down the corridor. I assume you don't snore. I assume you do. He gave her a sideways glance. For a fully compliant asset, you're weirdly mouthy. I was engineered for resilience, sarcasm included. Within an hour, she had reprogrammed the kitchen processor to produce a pale green nutrient paste that glowed faintly and vibrated in its container. Jake tried to chew through his own rehydrated meal beside her and choked back a gag. I'll make this simple, she said, arms folded. I won't run. I won't kill you. And I'm definitely not calling you master. Deal? He looked at her. Really looked. She moved like a soldier, carried the war in the way she held her shoulders, in the weariness behind her eyes. But instead of threats, she was offering terms. He raised his fork. Deal. But only if you agree to do the dishes. Her lips curled just slightly. Then we're at war again? He grinned in spite of himself. The war was over, but something else had just begun. Mornings at Outpost Delta. 17 rarely started peacefully. That day was no exception. An explosion rattled the vents, waking Jake with a start. His semi-hovering bunk decided gravity was optional again, and he rolled off with a grunt that was part curse, part protest. Lights flickered on, casting a greenish glow that screamed battlefield ambiance more than morning cheer. Computer status. The central AI chirped back with a voice too cheerful to be trusted. Gravity field at 87%. Kitchen processor offline. Explosion detected in corridor C3. Please do not be alarmed unless your name is Sergeant Jake Lawson, in which case, be alarmed. Why does the AI hate me? We ran your psychological profile through a sarcasm filter. It choked. Jake, still half-dressed and barely coherent, followed the scent of ozone and burnt ambition to the blast site. Unsurprisingly, the source was standing in front of a scorched conduit panel with a charred capacitor in hand, and the expression of someone who had just committed sabotage with absolute confidence. "Morning," Sarah said sweetly, her ears perked like antennae tuned to chaos. "What did you do?" "I fixed the air filtration." He stared at the smoking panel behind her. "You blew it up." "Semantics," she replied. Apparently in Zarinth engineering, fixing involved rerouting power through the espresso unit, half a wall panel, and, somehow, the same toaster that had once attempted to bite Jake. The toaster had survived. Barely. Now it blinked with one glowing red eye and made a sound that felt like judgment. Sarah followed him into the kitchen, still holding the capacitor like a trophy. "I was told humans need proper airflow for mood regulation." "You seem cranky." "We get cranky when our lungs collapse." So dramatic. The outpost now smelled like melted plastic and overcooked ambition. Sarah didn't seem to notice. She retrieved a nutrient pouch and drank it with the solemnity of a monk. "You look like a dehydrated cactus," she said mid-slurp. "That's because I'm out of coffee and emotional stability." "Do humans usually pair those two?" "We're held together by caffeine and denial." She perched on the counter, legs swinging, eyes scanning a schematic left open on a cracked hollow slate. "Your security systems are pitiful." "Thanks. Everyone loves hearing that about their home. I could breach your comm relay with a spoon and a bad attitude. You already hacked my bunk door twice." "That wasn't hacking. That was performance art." She was infuriating, sharp, impossible, and Jake hated to admit, brilliant. She had rewired the coolant lines on day 2. Reinforced the dome on day 3. Reprogrammed the airlock sensors to sing in harmony on day 4. He couldn't tell if she was trying to improve the outpost or drive him mad. And yet, there were moments, tiny ones, when she paused before entering a room, when she kept her back to the wall, when she sat with her eyes always tracking the exits. She didn't trust him. Not really. But she was trying, and that counted for something. Later that night, Jake found her at the top of the comms tower, perched on the edge like a shadow in the moonlight. Helmet off, hair swept back in the artificial wind. He opened a private communication line. "If the dome ruptures, you'll be jelly." "Just saying." Her voice came back calm, clear. "Then let me be cherry-flavored." He smiled despite himself. "Why are you always climbing things?" "Because your species builds walls. Mine learned to look over them." He didn't have a comeback for that. Instead, he handed her a dented cup of cocoa. She sniffed it. "Is this poison?" "Only emotionally." She sipped, winced, took another. "Disgusting. I love it." They sat in silence after that, two post-war strangers beneath a sky too big for either of them, breathing stars, pretending they weren't afraid of how human it all felt. The toaster achieved sentience on a Wednesday. It began with smoke, thick, curling, and far too deliberate to be anything but personal. Not the kind of smoke that hinted at harmless malfunction. No, this smoke came with intent. The kind that suggested a long, simmering resentment finally given form. Jake burst into the mess hall half-dressed, hair sticking out at odd angles, holding a wrench like a sword and a headache like a crown. He expected flames, maybe a hostile appliance uprising. Instead, he found Sarah crouched in front of the toaster, muttering sharp phrases in her native Zarinth dialect. Her tone resembled someone attempting a low-budget exorcism. "If you threaten another carbohydrate again," she whispered, "I swear on the bones of my ancestors." "Is it threatening the bread again?" Jake asked, squinting through the haze. "It screamed when I inserted the toast. I do that too, usually before mandatory briefings." She didn't laugh. But her ears twitched. That was something. "Your technology is emotionally unstable," she muttered, rising to her feet and brushing ash from her sleeves. That toaster came standard issue, along with mild depression and a free mug. The mug lies, by the way. The toaster blinked. Once. Red. Jake sighed. "I'll file a requisition for a flamethrower." That morning, after banishing the toaster to the airlock for observation and submitting the kind of maintenance report that could double as a cry for help, the two of them moved on to diagnostics. The outpost had developed mood swings. Temperature gradients fluctuated with tone. Lights flickered when the AI grew sarcastic. And the central system, previously dry and cold, had started offering motivational threats. "Welcome back, meatbags," it had said earlier. "Please don't disappoint me today." Sarah found it fascinating. She dug into the systems like a scientist studying a wild animal that had learned to lie. Jake just wanted the lights to stop flickering every time he sneezed. "Your AI is folding in on itself," Sarah said from under a console. "It tries to launch escape pods whenever you snore." "That's personal." She twisted a conduit. Her voice echoed from deep inside the maintenance shaft. "You snore with emotional intensity." They spent hours rewiring the cooling system and arguing about music. Jake claimed jazz was nuanced. Sarah countered with a Zarinth opera composed entirely of whale resonance and bone flute solos. He conceded by lunch. That evening, something shifted. They were in the main corridor, adjusting a heat valve that had begun refusing to acknowledge temperature as a concept. Sarah paused, then asked a question she hadn't asked before. "What was it like?" Jake blinked. The war, the day it ended. He leaned against the bulkhead, eyes unfocused. "I was half buried under a collapsed skimmer tank, missing 2 teeth, soaked in coolant and mud. I watched my squad vanish in an antimatter burst. The ceasefire came through like a whisper. No speeches, no flags, just stillness." Sarah nodded slowly. "In the Zarinth cities, everything went silent. We lit lanterns. Not for victory, for memory." There was a pause, not awkward, just real. Then a pipe overhead hissed and dumped coolant down Jake's back. Sarah laughed so hard she almost dropped her spanner. "I'm letting the toaster kill us next time," Jake muttered, wringing out his shirt. "You say that now," she grinned, "but you'll miss me when you're toast. No more puns. I'm a rebel. You should have expected resistance." That night, Jake lay awake in his bunk, staring at the ceiling panel as it flickered through algae green and battlefield beige. Something had changed. Not in the systems, though maybe those too. The change was in how she sat next to him now without flinching, in how she laughed like she was remembering how, in how she hadn't turned her back to him for more than a second at a time, until today. He didn't know what they were. Not captor and prisoner, not quite friends, not yet anything else. But he knew one thing. Whatever was rebuilding inside him, it started the first time she looked at him and didn't see a soldier. The next day, a shuttle landed like a migraine. Outpost Delta 17 groaned as its landing struts dug into the red lunar crust, sending tremors through the floor. Jake stood at the observation bay, arms folded, jaw tight. Sarah leaned casually on the console next to him, as if waiting to critique a performance. The ship was sleek, featureless, jet black, the kind of design that said stealth was for cowards, subtlety for the weak. "You think they brought snacks?" Jake muttered. "Define snacks," Sarah replied. "If you mean anything that doesn't vibrate or taste like regret, I hope so." The shuttle hatch hissed open with bureaucratic flair. 3 figures stepped out. 2 wore pressed command uniforms, creased so sharply Jake could probably cut himself on the seams. The third was a security bot the size of a small escape vehicle, exuding the warmth of a buzzsaw. The lead officer removed his helmet with the disdain of a man who owned 4 mirrors and loved none of them. "Sergeant Jake Lawson?" "Still me," Jake said, already exhausted, "though I go by Lord Commander of Refrigerated Suffering on weekends." The man didn't react. Bureaucrats never did. "I'm Commander River. Central Command sent me to investigate irregularities in your operational and personnel structure." Jake didn't like how River's eyes slid past him to land on Sarah. Cold. Calculating. "The alien," River said flatly. "Why is she still here?" Jake stepped forward. Because this is her assigned post. War compensation assets are to be transferred to central holding facilities after 90 days. She's not an asset. That's not your decision to make. Sarah didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She turned and walked out of the room without a word, the silence she left behind louder than any argument. The debrief dragged on. River peeled through Jake's logs like fruit, discarding anything he found inconvenient. Inventory discrepancies, unauthorized upgrades, the toaster incident, and, worst of all, Jake's failure to report Sarah's presence beyond protocol limits. She fixed the dome, repaired the hydro systems. She's the only reason this place is still functioning. That doesn't authorize her participation. Neither does the toaster. Yet here we are. River didn't laugh. Later that evening, Jake found Sarah in the hydroponics lab. She knelt beside a patch of glowing moss, her hand resting lightly on the edge of a planter as it pulsed with gentle green light. "I told them I wouldn't comply," he said. "You didn't have to." "I know, but I'm tired of people deciding what you are without asking you." She looked up, met his eyes, her expression unreadable. "They'll come back. I hope they do. The toaster's getting bored." That night, they sat on the roof of the outpost again. No mugs, no jokes, just stars. "I was thinking," Jake said after a long silence, "about what comes next." She raised one brow. "Escape plan? Partnership?" She blinked. "Like business? Like survival? Together?" Sarcastically, if necessary. She smiled. "Small, real, fine. But I want custody of the toaster. Over my burnt corpse. Deal." They clinked their metal cups together. The galaxy was still cruel, still vast, still full of men in sharp suits and sharper orders. But here, on a forgotten moon, under a stolen sky, two people had decided they were not property. They were choosing to stay. Not in ways that military diagnostics could track, but in the subtle shifts, the kind that lived in shadows and in silences. The AI, once monotone and bitter, now offered unsolicited relationship advice. The hydroponics lab began growing bioluminescent algae that glowed in time with vocal frequencies. The toaster was reclassified as semi-sentient and had developed a passion for laser-etching poetry onto bread. "Hey," the AI said one morning as Jake calibrated the shielding grid. "You should tell her how you feel." "I should reformat your code," Jake muttered. Sarah noticed the changes too. Not the tech, the rhythm. She no longer checked every exit when entering a room. Her boots stayed by the bed, not the door. She stopped flinching at every strange sound, except the toaster. It still screamed sometimes. One afternoon, she dragged Jake into the Badlands north of the outpost. It wasn't supposed to be a desert. Terraforming protocols had gone sideways during the war, and the land had been left in a state of chaotic stillbirth. Glassy sand, dark crystalline formations that hummed when the wind hit them just right. "This is where I used to hide," she said as they walked. "When the orbital strike started, we scattered underground. This place, it was refuge." They reached a wreck half buried in the sand, a scorched refugee pod. Sarah knelt and brushed away the grit, revealing a faded spiral star etched into the metal. "My cousin was on one like this. She never made it off-world." Jake stood beside her quietly. "She would have liked you." He raised an eyebrow. "She liked emotionally unstable humans with terrible posture. She liked people who listened." They sat together for a long time, saying nothing. The crystals hummed low beneath them like a lullaby for a planet that never woke. Then, as always, the moment ended with a proximity alert. "Unidentified shuttle inbound. ETA 10 minutes. No call sign." Military building. Sarah and Jake exchanged a look. It wasn't fear. It was calculation. They returned to the outpost in silence. Weapons unlocked. AI on alert. Even the toaster buzzed with low-grade anticipation. "Could be nothing," Jake muttered, eyes scanning the perimeter. "Could be everything," Sarah replied, already running shielding protocols. The shuttle descended fast, humming with threat, landing with the kind of subtlety usually reserved for orbital bombardments. Red dust curled under the dome. The docking bay lights flickered as the airlock hissed open. "Think they're here for me?" Sarah asked softly. "I think they'll regret it." 3 figures entered, 2 officers in uniforms blacker than their intentions. The third, a mech built like it could dismantle a battleship and leave a review after. Jake stood his ground. Sarah waited behind him, unreadable. Sergeant Jake Lawson, the lead officer said without warmth. Still me. Though on weekends I go by Lord of Crater Maintenance. I'm here to finalize the extraction order. You and the asset will be transferred to Central Command. This outpost is being decommissioned. Behind Jake, Sarah didn't move, didn't blink. You've had 48 days to comply, the officer continued. You chose not to. No, Jake said. I didn't. Explain. She's not an asset. She built this place, repaired it, protected it. She taught the toaster how to write poetry. It wrote a sonnet, Sarah added. About me, it was weirdly moving. The mech twitched. Processing, perhaps. The officer turned his gaze to Sarah. You understand your legal status. I understand you're 3 weeks too late. We can enforce the order. Try it, Jake said. The AI has mood swings now. The algae glows when it senses threats. And the toaster, well, it's learned passive-aggressive sabotage. Also, Sarah added, I upgraded the dome to scramble mid-range orbital scans. So technically, you don't even know we exist. The officer hesitated. The mech calculated its odds. And then, they left. No threats. No fire. Just silence. The shuttle lifted off and vanished into the clouds of dust and static, leaving only a confused hush behind. Jake let out a slow breath. That was anticlimactic. Suspiciously peaceful, Sarah added. They watched the sky together from the roof of the outpost. No mugs, no conversation, just silence. They'll come back, she said eventually. I know, with orders, bigger ships, less patience. Jake leaned back, arms behind his head. Then we make them regret finding us. She looked at him. Her voice was barely a whisper. Why? Because you're not my assignment. You're my choice. She didn't answer for a long time. Then that's the worst pickup line I've ever heard. He grinned. I've been saving it. The next morning, Outpost Delta 17 began to vanish. Not physically, but digitally, tactically, on scans and records, in satellites and pulses. It no longer existed. Cloaked in sand, buried in field disruptions, marked as inactive, abandoned, dead. They taught the AI to lie. They bribed the algae with extra nutrients. The toaster played a victory fanfare that was 80% static and 20% jazz. When command tried to reach them, there was no signal. When they sent a probe, it found only dust. Sarah and Jake stood together as the drone feed fizzled out. No one's watching, Jake said. She reached out and took his hand. Finally. They weren't soldiers anymore. Weren't captor and captive. Weren't even fugitives. They were just living. Weeks passed. No shuttles came. No encrypted orders. No agents in sharp uniforms. Just silence. Jake and Sarah adapted. The outpost, forgotten, mislabeled, technically non-existent, began to feel like something new. A home. The AI developed a dry sense of humor and started narrating weather reports in haiku. The hydroponics lab produced edible plants with surprising frequency and unsettling color. Turi, the toaster, became an artist, favoring abstract burn patterns and melancholic short-form poetry. One morning, Jake found a message scrawled across his toast. Even bread must rise before it breaks. Sarah claimed no involvement, but her smirk suggested otherwise. They developed routines, shared meals, quiet stargazing. Repairs made with equal parts precision and bickering. The lines that once defined roles, handler and asset, soldier and alien, blurred until they no longer mattered. One day Jake caught her laughing. Not the restrained sarcasm she wore like armor, but real laughter. The kind that echoed. The kind that broke something open in his chest. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. They didn't have to. They began altering the outpost's infrastructure. Shielding was reinforced, camouflaged further with sand disruption emitters. The AI was fed fragments of classical literature and Zarinth philosophy, resulting in long existential monologues during diagnostics. They let it talk. It helped. The dome, once cold and flickering, took on a subtle warmth. Lights stopped blinking without reason. The kitchen stopped trying to poison them, mostly. They built a garden from salvaged modules and hybrid seeds. Sarah sculpted the soil by hand. Jake rigged heat lamps from old sensor arrays. The plants responded, slowly, stubbornly, but alive. In the evenings, they sat on the roof, boots kicked off, heads tilted to the sky. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. Once, Sarah asked what he missed most. Freedom, Jake said, then corrected himself. Number this. This is freedom. I just didn't know it looked like this. Another time he asked her what scared her most. Not dying, she said. Dying without mattering. You matter here. You're biased. You're right. Their relationship defied definition. Closer than comrades, softer than survival. Still spiky, full of jabs and jokes. But there was something underneath it, unspoken, undeniable. Then one night, the stars blinked wrong. Jake noticed it first, a stutter in the sky, a pulse that didn't belong. He tapped the console. Sarah was beside him before he could call. Long-range scan, unmarked vessel, no transponder, no ID. Fast approach. Jake didn't panic. Sarah didn't run. They prepared. Power conduits were shunted, shielding arrays warmed. The AI locked down all comms and activated defense protocols with cheerful menace. Unauthorized shuttle detected, it chirped. Shall I make toast? Yes, Jake said. Make it threatening. The shuttle came in low and fast, cloaked until the last second. When it landed, the dust curled like claws. The air grew still, too still. They waited in the docking corridor side by side. Jake had his hand on his weapon. Sarah had her hand on his. The doors opened. 3 figures entered. 2 wore black. The third, a mech, bigger than the last, humming with quiet destruction. They didn't speak. Jake broke the silence. I'm guessing this isn't a social call. The lead officer stepped forward, helmet under one arm. You were ordered to report to Central Command. No, Jake said. I was ordered to hand over someone who no longer belongs to anyone. You're harboring a military asset. I'm living with a person. She's still Zarenth. Still classified. She's not your classification anymore. The mech's targeting system's word to life. Sarah didn't flinch. Jake stepped in front of her. This outpost is protected by modified shielding, adaptive AI, and a toaster with violent tendencies. You want to test that? The officer glanced at the mechanic. The mech hesitated. And then, for reasons neither of them would ever fully understand, the team left. No shots, no arrests, just silence. As if even Central Command knew some battles weren't worth picking. As the shuttle lifted off and vanished into the dusty sky, Jake turned to Sarah. You think they'll come back? Eventually. Then we'll be ready. Or gone. Or both. That night, the AI played soft static that resembled music. The dome lights flickered in harmony. The toaster produced a short poem titled, Resistance is Warm and Lightly Crisped. Jake and Sarah lay side by side beneath a sky full of unnamed stars. What if they come harder next time, he asked. Then we resist harder. She turned to him. You still sure about this? He smiled. You're not my assignment. I'm not your anything. You're everything. She made a face. That line was worse than the last one. I'm getting better. You're getting bolder. They kissed then, not with urgency, but with familiarity, with the knowledge that they had survived something larger than war. In the following days, they took the final step. They cloaked the outpost completely. It no longer existed on any map. No pings, no echoes, no records. The AI refused all inquiries with pre-programmed SAS. The algae was fed a full diet of solar-mixed nutrients and sang in luminous patterns. The toaster finally stopped threatening anyone. Mostly. Jake and Sarah woke each morning to silence and soft mechanical humming. They ate together, laughed together, rewired broken systems and replaced failing parts. They lived, no longer defined by orders or by species or by history. They weren't hiding. They just weren't asking permission anymore. And under that sky, untouched, unsupervised, entirely theirs, a new story began. Quiet, unregistered, unstoppable.